Hi, everybody, and welcome. I have the pleasure to introduce this panel about direct democracy. And we have two great speakers today. We have Professor Galais, I hope I pronounced it correctly, that is going to start. And then Professor Gastil, who's going to continue. I think we plan to speak around 20 minutes for each presentation, and then we are going to open up for question. I have an hard time seeing people, so when we start the question and answer moment, forgive me because I'm not sure I'm going to be able to see. I'm going to start looking like that. So without no further ado, please, Professor Galais.
Thank you very much, Pablo. Iba a hablar en castellano, perdón. En primer lugar, me gustaría decir que mi campo de investigación está más cercano a la opinión pública y a las experiencias participativas a nivel local que a la democracia directa, pero haré lo mejor que pueda, sobre todo por tener este honor de introducir a John Gastil, que es el auténtico experto aquí. Esto también tendrlo en cuenta a la hora de las preguntas y de los comentarios. Y en principio, para comenzar, hablaré de los 4 mecanismos básicos que la academia considera que tienen que ver con la democracia directa, tanto a nivel estatal, sobre todo, como a nivel local. El gran experto a nivel mundial es Altman, y él distingue entre los referéndums obligatorios, que vienen determinados por la Constitución, los plebiscitos facultativos, que pueden ser consultivos obligatorios, pero en cualquier caso están iniciados por el Estado, fundamentalmente por el poder legislativo, y luego hay 2 mecanismos que están iniciados, que pueden estar iniciados por los ciudadanos: la iniciativa legislativa popular y el referéndum, que puede acabar en ley. Cabe decir que el referéndum, que es el barco insignia de la democracia directa, tiene 2 concepciones, hay 2 creencias erróneas alrededor de él, y esto lo explica muy bien Alberto Penedès en un artículo, un profesor español, en un artículo publicado la semana pasada en Letras Libres. Él explica que ni está originado en Grecia ni en Suiza, ni está realmente vinculado en un principio con la democracia. En realidad, el referéndum es algo que nació en las antiguas colonias inglesas, más tarde Estados Unidos, alrededor de 1788, concretamente en Rhode Island, para ratificar la Constitución, el borrador de Constitución primero que hubo, y después la Asamblea Francesa, después de la Revolución Francesa en 1793, copió este instrumento con no demasiado éxito, y el siguiente en ponerlo en práctica fue Napoleón Bonaparte, que gracias a él se invistió cónsul vitalicio y emperador en 1802 y 1804, con lo cual el referéndum en el ámbito europeo quedó bastante vinculado a la idea precisamente de autoritarismo y de falta de democracia. No fue hasta 1891 en que Suiza incluyó el referéndum y la reforma por iniciativa legislativa popular, la reforma de la Constitución, como un elemento nuevo. Entonces, a partir de ahí sí queda vinculado a la idea de democracia radical, y es entonces cuando los populistas americanos vuelven a recoger esta idea, ya pasada por el filtro europeo y más concretamente suizo, y lo llevan a cabo, lo incluyen en Dakota del Sur en 1896, el referéndum, la posibilidad de hacer referéndums. A partir de ahí sí que quedan unidas la tradición democrática y el referéndum como ejemplo de democracia directa. Desde entonces ha habido muchísima variación en el mundo. Esta es solamente una diapositiva que recoge algunos de los casos del mundo occidental. Hay muchos otros casos también en Latinoamérica, etcétera, pero eso da una idea, un reflejo bastante gráfico de la variación que hay a nivel de las iniciativas que vienen desde abajo, las iniciativas iniciadas por la ciudadanía, en azul, y las iniciativas de democracia directa que vienen desde arriba. Entonces podemos ver como, por ejemplo, Francia sería la campeona de las iniciativas, referéndums, etcétera, que vienen desde arriba, que tenemos los casos de Liechtenstein y de San Marino también, y de Suiza, por supuesto, en el extremo de los países que con más frecuencia emplean mecanismos de democracia directa iniciados desde abajo por la ciudadanía, y también vemos algún fenómeno curioso como de variación a nivel temporal. O sea, vemos, por ejemplo, que Alemania y España tienen algunos ejemplos, algunos casos de participación directa iniciada desde abajo antes de su pasado dictatorial, es decir, en las repúblicas de Weimar y la Segunda República Española. Pero en general, ¿cuál es el panorama? El panorama en todo el mundo es de estados que son más bien celosos de ceder su poder y más la iniciativa, en algo tan serio como la iniciativa legislativa, a la ciudadanía. Aquí una representación gráfica del Leviatán, del Estado. Tenemos unos estados que por su tradición liberal no están muy proclives, no son muy proclives a ceder este tipo de poder a la ciudadanía o de dejar que ellos inicien algo. Hay un profesor, Kirchgassner, que explica que de hecho el imperio de la ley está en contraposición con el principio democrático y que solamente en Suiza esto se saldó en favor del principio democrático. En el resto de estados occidentales, particularmente ejemplificados en Alemania, la ciudadanía tiene derecho a protegerse del poder absoluto o el posible poder absoluto del Estado a través de denunciarlos sirviéndose del poder legislativo, con lo cual es una cosa o la otra, es el imperio de la ley o la capacidad de regularse a sí mismo y por lo tanto tú eres el propio responsable de las decisiones. Sin embargo, pese a esta situación en la cual el Estado es bastante reacio a ceder este tipo de poder, tenemos unidades subnacionales, tanto regiones como estados federados, como ciudades y pueblos, que sí han tomado la posibilidad de iniciar o de llevar a cabo ejemplos de democracia directa para mejorar la eficiencia de sus políticas públicas, para ganar el corazón y las mentes de sus ciudadanos e incluso para competir con el Estado, para disputar incluso con el Estado cuando estas unidades subnacionales están en conflicto abierto con el Estado la legitimidad de sus políticas públicas. Entonces sí encontramos más ejemplos a nivel local y regional. Curiosamente, y aunque filosóficamente son dos cosas separadas, la democracia participativa y la democracia directa, cuando bajamos al nivel local, en la academia se tiende a considerar que la democracia directa queda englobada dentro de la democracia participativa, que es como una especie de extensión de la democracia participativa, donde los ciudadanos tienen más poder decisorio, más capacidad de iniciar estas experiencias, etc. Y en la mayoría de las veces dejamos de denominar los referéndums, cuando bajamos a nivel local empiezan a denominarse consultas, aunque, bueno, como dirá John, hay otras maneras de denominarlo y también hay algunos ejemplos como jurados o asambleas ciudadanas e incluso algunos animales raros, de plumaje raro, como serían los consejos abiertos en los pequeños núcleos, como en el caso español. También sabemos que a partir de los años 90 varios países, sobre todo países candidatos a entrar en la Unión Europea, empezaron a desarrollar más mecanismos de democracia directa a nivel local como parte de sus reformas administrativas para encajar mejor en la filosofía de la Unión Europea, en la descentralización, etc. Y se dan algunos casos particularmente curiosos, como por ejemplo que en Polonia o en Macedonia el grado de vinculación de estas consultas a nivel local depende de la participación, es decir, pasan a ser vinculantes si la participación excede el 30 o el 50% en Polonia y Macedonia relativamente. Así que el resultado es que aproximadamente un 40% de los países miembros de la Unión Europea tienen iniciativas populares y el 75% cuentan con algún tipo de referéndum como denominación genérica, incluyendo los que son vinculantes y no, iniciados por la ciudadanía y no, a nivel local. Estas iniciativas varían enormemente, tanto desde el nombre, desde la nomenclatura que utilizamos para denominarlos, como desde quién es el iniciador, si es el gobierno local o es la ciudadanía, y cuál es el grado de decisión que realmente pueden tener. Por ejemplo, en España, hasta la fecha, se han celebrado aproximadamente unas 40, se han aprobado, porque se aprueban por el gobierno, aproximadamente unas 40, de las cuales aproximadamente 30 se han celebrado. La fecha de 2014 no es banal, es porque a partir de 2014-2015 el Tribunal Supremo y el Tribunal Constitucional emitieron sentencias para tratar de resolver un conflicto entre Cataluña y el Estado por el uso de las consultas como una posible herramienta de desarrollo del derecho de autodeterminación y ahora mismo no sabemos muy bien si las consultas a nivel local son todas referéndum y por lo tanto deberían pasar todas por el Parlamento o qué. Bueno, estamos ahí en una zona un poco gris. En cuanto a los objetivos perseguidos por este tipo de iniciativas, son exactamente los mismos que a nivel estatal. Hay dos objetivos básicos, uno sería mejorar la calidad de la ciudadanía y la otra sería mejorar la calidad de las políticas públicas. En el primer objetivo incluimos desde empoderar a los ciudadanos a dotarlos de más y mejores competencias cívicas y en el segundo pues entraría todo lo que tiene que ver con la responsabilidad política, tanto desde el punto de vista de mejorar la receptividad de las élites como su capacidad de rendir cuentas, así como la efectividad y la eficiencia de las políticas públicas. Pero, siempre hay un pero, no queda claro, es decir, la evidencia que tenemos ahora mismo a nivel académico no queda claro si realmente las políticas públicas obtenidas por esta vía son más eficientes, puesto que en algunos lugares como Suiza se ha demostrado que sí se ha conseguido reducir el gasto y el déficit público y en otros como Alemania y algunos casos en California también se han dado, el efecto sería el contrario. Y con respecto a los objetivos emancipatorios encontramos lo mismo, ¿no? Encontramos que por una parte, sin ir más lejos, en Suiza se ha conseguido rebajar el nivel de evasión de impuestos, pero por otra parte sabemos que los ciudadanos suizos han decidir sobre cosas que entran en conflicto con los derechos humanos, ¿de acuerdo? Hay muchos retos vinculados con la participación de la mayoría de ellos, porque todos sois más expertos que yo en este campo, han sido largamente discutidos en estas jornadas, como los objetivos, cuál es realmente la voluntad política de meterse en este tipo de campo, cuáles son las barreras legales, las competencias a nivel local, por ejemplo, para hacerlo, y quién participa, ¿no? Hasta qué punto son representativos de la sociedad las personas que se acercan a este tipo de procesos. Y yo me voy a ocupar en las próximas diapositivas, no queda mucho, de tres temas en concretos. Uno, el objetivo, o sea, el material sobre el que trabajamos, cuál es el tema de la participación de la democracia directa. Otro sería quién quiere o quién dice que quiere participar en estos mecanismos de democracia directa local. Y el último sería cuántas personas participan, ¿de acuerdo? Entonces, con respecto al tema, encontramos que, por una parte, las pocas encuestas de las que disponemos indican que la gente se queja de que los temas son triviales, no les interesan, etc. Y también sabemos por la experiencia de Suiza que esto a lo que lleva son a consultas poco participadas, con un nivel de participación muy baja. Pero por otra parte, sobre todo por los referéndums que han habido a nivel estatal en los últimos años, Colombia, Brexit, etc., empieza a haber una preocupación creciente sobre cuáles son los temas que realmente debe poder tratarse en una consulta directa a la ciudadanía, porque entrarían en conflicto pues, desde los derechos humanos a las competencias que realmente tiene una ciudad, un municipio para hacerlo. Y por otra parte tendríamos el tema de cómo de concreto y cómo de especializado es el tema que se somete a votación, puesto que si es algo muy técnico, idealmente se debería poder facilitar toda la información y posibilitar un debate previamente a la toma de decisiones, cosa que no necesariamente está asociado a una consulta. En el otro extremo, si el tema es algo sobre el que ya existe consenso, pues bastaría con consultar una encuesta o sencillamente poner a los partidos políticos a trabajar y a ponerse de acuerdo entre ellos. Con lo cual, un área más o menos segura de consulta pública local sería algo que no tocase estos extremos. Y para los casos no tan cruciales y un poco más técnicos, tirar de los típicos mecanismos de participación ciudadana, jornadas, talleres, metaplanes, etc. Y para las áreas que ya empezarían a tocar aspectos un poco más cruciales y más estratégicos de los municipios, pues tal vez habría que mirar otro tipo de mecanismos, como los jurados o las asambleas que permiten ese intercambio no solo de información, sino de opinión. En cuanto a quién quiere participar, no quién acaba participando, sino quién dice que quiere participar, nos encontramos con un problema. Y es que quien dice que quiere participar, y esto lo decían ya en 2001 Dalton, Barkin y Drummond, se encuentran en los márgenes del sistema político. Son gente que no está muy interesada en política, no sabe mucho sobre política y tiene sentimientos más bien negativos hacia toda la política, los actores y el sistema político en general. con lo cual ellos prevén que podría ser la puerta de entrada hacia expresiones de populismo, nativismo, etc. Y por lo que sabemos 10 años después, Pau Alarcón y Joan Font hicieron una encuesta que más o menos vuelve a encontrar que sí, parece que la gente quiere participar en política, pero dicen que quieren participar más cuanto más abstencionistas, jóvenes, extremistas son, lo cual da que pensar que a lo mejor si se les da la oportunidad real de participar, tal vez no participarían, y solo dicen que quieren participar para extraer el poder de quien lo tiene actualmente, que son unas élites que no están bien vistas, por las cuales no sienten afecto. Con lo cual hay un peligro implícito en la gente que dice que quiere participar y luego en realidad no va a querer asumir esa responsabilidad y ese trabajo, esa carga. Y sería abrir la puerta a lo que Ramiro ha traducido en castellano como democracia sigilosa, ¿no? Gente que en realidad estaría dispuesta a ceder todo el poder decisorio a un buen técnico o incluso a un buen dictador que mágicamente sabe cuáles son las preferencias del pueblo, sin molestarlo demasiado y sobre todo sin cansarlo ni ponerlo a trabajar demasiado. Con lo cual no son exactamente fiables las preferencias manifestadas en encuestas sobre quién dice que quiere participar. No son muy indicativas de quién realmente va a acabar participando. Y finalmente está el tema de cuántas personas acuden a estas consultas, ¿no? Las que se supone que son abiertas y que son sobre más o menos todo el censo, parte del censo o incluso un censo ampliado a menores de edad. Tenemos el problema de que solemos juzgarlos, tanto la ciudadanía como los académicos como los medios, con los mismos criterios que utilizamos para juzgar experiencias de este tipo a nivel estatal, incluso referéndums vinculantes relacionados con la Constitución, las leyes. Si veis el panel de la izquierda, son frases reales extraídas de medios de comunicación y son todas derogatorias, es decir, siempre que se ha tratado un caso de consulta a nivel local, en España, quedamos que no son muchos, que son aproximadamente 40, siempre han saltado los medios de comunicación con expresiones que los hacen de menos y que señalan el fracaso de que solo han atraído un 12% en el caso de Barcelona en 2010, un 56,5% en el caso de Palamós en 94, un tercio de la población en Arbúcies en el 86, todos son fracasos, siempre, para los medios de comunicación. Claro, ¿cuál es el problema aquí? Pues hay varios. Para empezar, que los gobiernos locales deberían tomar conciencia de esto y anunciar antes de celebrar este tipo, o de permitir que se celebren este tipo de consultas, cuáles son los resultados esperables y qué sería un buen porcentaje de participación. En segundo lugar, los medios de comunicación también deberían tomar conciencia de qué tipo de consultas estamos hablando. Son celebraciones que se dan en un segundo orden, lo que llamamos en ciencia política segundo orden, por lo tanto no son a nivel estatal. No son la mayoría de ellas obligatorias, en el caso español ninguna de ellas, por lo tanto, ¿qué tipo de porcentaje sería esperable? Teniendo en cuenta, además son experiencias bastante nuevas, tengamos en cuenta que el primero de los referéndums celebrados en territorio europeo por primera vez en la historia tuvo un 26% de participación. También habría que aprender a comparar peras con peras, ¿no? Por ejemplo, en el caso de Badalona, que es bastante reciente, en 2016, en la votación para convalidar los presupuestos participativos se obtuvo un 4,3% de participación que el ayuntamiento anunció como una victoria, los medios de comunicación vieron como un fracaso, pero claro, ¿con qué podemos comparar esto? Pues por ejemplo en Madrid, más o menos por las mismas fechas, esta consulta obtuvo un 1,7% de participación, con lo cual efectivamente se podría decir que no está mal, pero tenemos que encontrar el referente, ¿no? En el caso de Barcelona, por ejemplo, ese 12,2% podríamos compararlo con el porcentaje de personas que en encuestas nos dicen que han participado en algún tipo de experiencia participativa en el ayuntamiento, es un 10%, con lo cual ha conseguido arrastrar más gente a una consulta que todos los procesos participativos que se han podido celebrar en un año en la ciudad de Barcelona. No está nada mal. Entonces, bueno, ahí lo dejo, el problema de cuánto, cómo contarlo, cómo anunciarlo, cómo venderlo a la ciudadanía para no desgastar ese empaque, ¿no? esa voluntad de acercarnos a la democracia directa. Y también, como último mensaje, diría que si los gobiernos locales están preocupados por cómo aproximarse a este problema de los números absolutos, tal vez deberían considerar otros mecanismos que no centran su peso o la legitimidad en la cantidad de gente que pueden arrastrar, sino en la calidad del proceso, en la calidad del debate y del intercambio de opiniones, como sería el caso del que nos viene a hablar ahora John Gastil. Gracias.
Well, thank you so much for the fantastic time. We're actually 2 minutes. Keep talking. And now we're going to move to Professor John Gastil, that comes from the University of Pennsylvania and has worked extensively for the past 20 years on deliberation and communication.
Bueno, bienvenidos. Voy a hablar en inglés, pero un momento en español a decir gracias para esta oportunidad de hablar con ustedes. So thank you for the opportunity to talk with you. I will speak about one particular problem with the direct democratic process and one particular solution. I am excited for the discussion. We're actually going to have lots of time for discussion, so both of us are looking forward to answering questions. Perhaps our moderator will even have a few words to share as well. The basic idea I'm here to talk to you about is a process called the Citizens Initiative Review. I may just call it the review for short, but the Citizens Initiative Review has a simple goal. The goal is to provide voters with reliable information that helps them make a more considered judgment when voting on these sorts of questions, these laws and budget questions that appear on the ballot. Direct democracy has an obvious virtue. The obvious virtue is that everybody has the chance to directly express their voice on a question on their ballot. But it should also have an obvious vice, an obvious problem, which is that we often make that choice, we often mark our ballot, not fully understanding the question before us. This is not unique to voters. Often our elected legislators cast votes without really knowing what they're doing, but they have a whole infrastructure to help them understand the law before them. They have caucuses, committees, consultations, legislative bureaus that provide them statistics and analysis. Voters have none of that. The Citizens Initiative Review tries to provide voters with a simple source of information that they feel they can trust that doesn't tell them how to vote, but helps them consider the question before them. So I'll describe the problem first, and then I'll talk mostly about the review as a potential solution. So first, I'm going to refer to a term in English, ballot measures. No estoy cierto la palabra en español. I'm not sure what the word is for it, but it includes many things. Initiatives, referenda, bond measures, where you vote to bring out some bonds to pay for something, or any other policy or budgetary issue. You could be voting on a law, a constitutional amendment, all kinds of things. So to make it simple, I refer to that as one thing, ballot measures, questions that are put on the ballot for voters. The electorate has very limited knowledge of what these ballot measures would actually do, and this is for several reasons. Here I speak from my experience in the United States. Sometimes a ballot measure is so confusing that voting yes is actually voting no. For example, a question might be on your ballot about whether to repeal a new law. So if you favor that new law, you have to oppose the ballot measure. And a small percentage of people end up confused, but that percentage of confusion is sometimes greater than the margin of victory or defeat, such that the outcome would have been different if voters simply understood that yes means no. Other times, there is a misleading purpose to the ballot measure. For example, in my state of Pennsylvania, voters were recently asked if the retirement age for judges should be established at 74 years of age. After that point, judges must retire. Many voters voted for that, thinking that they were establishing the first and only retirement age, because they thought, yes, 74 is far too old, judges must retire. In fact, they were raising the retirement age from a lower number, but the ballot question didn't say that, because the Republican Party wanted to save a judge, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who was just about to become too old. By raising it to 74, he could stay. But many, many voters had no idea that that's what really the question was. Also, sometimes in the United States, California is famous for having conflicting ballot measures, where two ballot measures try to do the same thing, but one of them actually would undermine the other and negate them both. Another common problem, very frequently in the state of Washington, there were ballot measures proposed by one particular person who would deliberately put things on the ballot that he knew were unconstitutional. That is, once the law was passed, it would go to the courts and the court would reject it. But that would build up his credibility as an outsider, as a populist, the voice of the people. In fact, it created alienated voters, voters who felt like they voted for something only to have the courts reject it. So it was a very cynical process. But again, the voters had no idea that these laws weren't constitutionally allowed, and so on. Another problem is that voters are very biased in how they select, process, and retain information about ballot measures. Voters don't know where to find neutral information, and they often deliberately choose information that supports what they already believe. And they very rarely consider counter-arguments. We've done surveys asking voters to say one argument for the opposite side on a ballot measure. If you support it, give me one reason that other people oppose it. It is very difficult for voters to do this. They don't know a single reason why someone might disagree with them, which is a very bad sign that deliberation is not taking place. Finally, those who identify very strong with a political party, if the party tells them how to vote, that is overwhelmingly exactly how they will vote as a result. And if you think about it, that's very ironic, because the purpose of direct democracy is to let every person decide. But in fact, in these cases, voters are so uncertain that they'll let the elite of their party decide for them, in which case, why did we hold an election? That party already has its own representation in the legislature. So, that's the problem. The Citizens Initiative Review, the idea is that you could have a body of citizens study these ballot measures and provide a one-page statement, una página, that's all, that gives voters information and sometimes an implicit recommendation, sometimes a suggestion for how to vote. Think of the initiative process or the ballot measure process this way. First, the idea is conceived. Oh, we should put this question on the ballot. Then the proposal appears on the ballot. It qualifies for the ballot. But then before voters vote, that's where the Citizens Initiative Review happens. So once we know that question will be on the ballot, the Citizens Initiative Review is convened, analyzes the issue, and then writes a one-page statement that every voter can see before the election. I will describe the process in some detail, but just quickly, it works like this. 20 people gather together, a random sample. They have 4 days to study the issue, hear from both sides, and hear from some experts. And then they write their statement, and this is very important. In the state of Oregon is the only state where this process is legally authorized. That one-page statement goes in the official voter's guide, the pamphlet that is mailed to every single household that has a registered voter. So that one-page statement is very powerful. It reaches the eyes, potentially, of every voter. All right. So, in more detail. First of all, how did this come about? Well, state legislators are very concerned about the initiative process. Voters are very favorable of it, but voters want it to be improved. So state legislators can't remove it. Many of them would like to because it takes power away from them, but they can't. It's politically impossible. So what they want to do is improve the process, help voters make better decisions. So that's how, in the state of Oregon, it came to be that the state legislature passed this law. Now the state of Massachusetts is considering it as well. How it's triggered. So during an election, there is a commission, a CIR commission. A majority of this commission is made up of former review panelists. Everyday citizens from these panels make up the majority of this commission. That commission looks at the issues on the ballot and chooses the ones that are most appropriate for a review. Some questions are just too simple, not important. They don't want those to be done. They want to choose the ones that are the most important, that will have the biggest impact, and maybe where there is something obviously confusing or misleading that needs to be discussed. Funding is a problem. The state of Oregon established this process at a time when it had no budget. This was during the recession. The state had to cut programs. So it legally authorized this, but gave it no money. So private funding, foundations, philanthropies have paid for the review in Oregon. the state of Massachusetts would be the first one to pay for this review through the state budget. So the mandate of the review is very simple. As I said, it is simply writing a one-page statement. That statement contains 3 things. First, some key findings, basic facts you really need to understand, and then what they consider to be the best arguments for this measure and the best arguments against this measure. So the reasons why you might support or oppose, and some basic facts everyone needs to understand. There are no alternative facts in these statements. There's only one set of basic facts that everyone needs to understand. All right. The panelists are selected by an invitation sent out to a random sample of all registered voters. A small percentage agree to participate, and then a stratification process is used to make sure that the final panel is demographically representative. The deliberation takes 4 days, gives them enough time for deliberation, and as I said, they hear from the people who propose the law, people who oppose the law, and then experts chosen by the organizers, overseen by that same Citizens Initiative Review Commission. Our research team includes Katie Knobloch sitting there in front. We have studied this process for almost 10 years, and we look at the quality of the deliberation. I won't say much about that today. It is extremely high. The citizen panels do a great job of deliberating. The quality of the citizen statements, that one page they write, it's very good. So far, no factual errors. Sometimes it's a little easier to read than other times, but generally it's good and helpful to voters. And then finally, the impact. That's what we study in some ways the most. Does this actually change people? And you'll see some evidence, but yes, the answer is it has an effect. Not a large effect, but it does clearly have an effect. And again, it's distributed through the voters pamphlet, which is a crucial feature. So some people ask often, what does it look like? How are the 4 days organized? This is how the Citizens Initiative Review is done. The first day, think of it as a training day, a whole day to just understand this task before you. This is something these voters will have never done in their lives. Spent 4 days studying an issue, writing a one-page statement. So a whole day of training. Second day, they hear from both sides, and this gets beyond the sound bites, the simplistic slogans. If they use simplistic slogans, it's a disaster for them because they have 4 days. So if you make a very simplistic argument that doesn't have evidence, it will just be a matter of minutes until you start getting pounded with questions. And if you can't answer those questions, you are in serious trouble. So the pro and con sides are actually having to learn how to have serious arguments that can withstand criticism and scrutiny. But they have a whole day to kind of get their arguments out there, and then the panelists have time to discuss those. They'll also hear from expert witnesses, and then they have a whole day of deliberation to weigh all this, to consider the sentences they want to put in that one page. And on the last day, they finalize that statement, which is a statement they write themselves. The pro and con sides have sentences that they want to put in the statement, but the citizens get to decide exactly the words of that statement, and then they present their findings. As I said, it goes into the voters' pamphlet. It looks like this. Here's an example of the kinds of words that might appear in a Citizens Initiative Review statement. This is from a real one on genetically modified organism labeling. And one example is they wanted voters to know that 64 countries around the world require these labels, and 16 of the top 25 countries that import Colorado food products require it. So this was a test of the review in the state of Colorado, and the panel really wanted voters to know genetically modified food labeling is not some crazy idea. This is becoming a very common phenomenon. Many Coloradans had no idea whether the products were commonly labeled. But they also wanted Colorado voters to understand that this proposal actually will not be labeling most of the food and beverages that we buy. So it may sound like you'll get labels on the things you eat, but you probably won't. And those are both important things to understand that are not obvious when you see the title of the ballot measure. So just 2 examples. That's the kind of detail and analysis that voters are given. This is just a quick summary of all the issues that have been covered by a review since 2010. Marijuana, gambling, housing, criminal justice reform, all kinds of things have been considered in these years. This shows you where in the United States it's happened, with Oregon in the Pacific Northwest, Washington, California, Arizona, Colorado, and then Massachusetts. And then also Finland and Switzerland are planning to do pilot tests of the Citizens Initiative Review in the next year. So how do people think about the Citizens Initiative Review? The panelists themselves, the citizens who are chosen to participate, they love it. They absolutely love it. This is a result very common for citizen juries and other small deliberative bodies. The citizens who participate are so excited about a kind of politics that is reasonable and thoughtful and serious and looks carefully at the issues. So with very professional, neutral facilitators, very high satisfaction. We could show you so much data that just shows the same as this. People really, who participate really love it. This is a very important finding. Some people ask, well, I would like to do a Citizens Initiative review, but we don't have a voter's guide. I think we'll hold the review and then just have a press conference, or we'll put the results on a website. The key to the review is that voter's pamphlet mailed to every household. That is the power that this body has. It's like its own media system, right? It can distribute these findings through this pamphlet. Without that, most Oregon voters would never hear of it, right? Voter awareness is, you know, in English we have a saying, is the glass half empty or half full? Well, it's half full. Roughly half of Oregon voters are aware of the Citizens Initiative Review, and half of Oregon voters have never heard of it, even though it's right there in front of them. So if you run campaigns, this is very good. It is very hard to reach voters when you campaign. But if you're a Democrat and you want this number to be higher, I'm sorry to disappoint you, it doesn't seem to be rising after several elections. Roughly 2/3 of voters say that these statements are at least somewhat useful, but 1 in every 4 voters who read the statement, and we do surveys every year, they say this is very useful, this is very helpful, and they're excited to know how to vote. It really helps them think through the difficulties of the issue. How much do people trust it? The magic of the review is that people are being asked to trust fellow citizens. They're not being asked to trust some expert panel, and that's important. But still, you know, only half say, I trust this a little. About 1/3 say, I trust it a lot. So it's not magical. This isn't something that people believe in with all their heart and soul. Some do, but most are a little skeptical, and maybe that's healthy, right? It is a democracy after all. Here is an example of the kind of effect that the Citizens Initiative Review consistently has on voters. It increases voter knowledge. We ask a series of knowledge questions, and it raises it. But again, the effect is not huge, right? So you can see it's increasing at an increment. Voters are becoming a little more knowledgeable. One of the things we didn't anticipate that's really interesting is that the review sometimes helps people move from thinking they know something to really knowing something. So think about it. During an election, if I ask you a series of true-false questions about something on your ballot, you might say you think you know that this is true, or you think you know that that is false. After you read the statement, you know it's true, and you know that that's false. And that's very important, because the things we think we know aren't that useful, because we know we might be wrong. So sometimes it builds up confidence in things you had heard that are true, and now you know that they are. So elite perceptions of the Citizens Initiative Review. Some elites view it as a threat, even though in the state of Oregon, both political parties ended up supporting the Citizens Initiative Review and made it permanent 2 years later. And it's had broad co-sponsorship in Massachusetts. The one organized opposition, as mi gente, as my people, the progressive left in Oregon, the leadership of this organization has tried to oppose at times the Citizens Initiative Review. The membership of this organization love it. Overwhelmingly, the people of Oregon, 80 to 90%, favor this process. But this progressive organization is run by people who are professional campaign consultants. For pay, they run initiative campaigns. They don't like the idea of this review interfering with their professional campaign tactics. So they have tried opposing it in Oregon, and probably are the reason that the law doesn't exist in the state of Washington, because they talked to their colleagues in Washington and told them, you don't want this. It will make it harder for you to control the electorate. That's the progressive left in the Pacific Northwest. Makes me very triste, very sad. There you go. Yeah, probably undermined by those representatives. All right. So a final word is just, again, I want to say thank you, gracias a todos, for this opportunity to share with you this political reform. Katie and I have just finished a book about this process, and the title of the book, which actually we finished the book 2 years ago, the title of the book is Hope for Democracy, Esperanza para Democracia. See? But in the 2 years since, it's soon to be published, but we've had 2 years to consider that title. We still think that this process gives us hope for democracy, but because of Donald Trump, we don't want to sound like idiots. So now it's Hope for Democracy question mark. Es una pregunta ahora. Hope for democracy? Creo que sí, pero no estamos seguros. We're not sure, but I just want to emphasize that I was just in Madrid for a conference earlier, and anywhere you travel for one of these conferences on democracy, you will learn about new processes, innovations in city government, state government, national government that give you hope. You know, participatory budgeting, all these things that give you hope. At the same time, there are very worrisome trends, very powerful forces, populism and so on, that are causing, you know, authoritarian tendencies. So I don't mean to sound naive, but I do hope that after this presentation, you now know about one more reason to be a little bit hopeful about our ability to improve the way we run democracies, to create better laws, more confident citizens, and hopefully stronger democratic systems. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Gastil. Do you have any questions? Yes, one there. I'm gonna move around.
Thank you very much. I'm Bruno Kaufmann. I'm the global democracy correspondent from the Swiss Broadcasting Company, and I found your both presentations very interesting, because on one side you addressed the problems of fundamental problems about the idea of direct democracy, and on the other side you explained about how to make direct democracy a little bit more democratic. And in fact, I sometimes feel when we discuss this that there is a confusion about the idea of participatory and direct democracy, in a sense that you can shortcut the sovereignty of the people by certain methodological things like small groups being invited to take part, or just like downsize the sovereignty into a like we have with parliaments, into small, the few who make the decisions. So in a way, it's very encouraging to see that the Citizen Initiative Review really takes stock in the basic idea that we, the citizens, are the sovereign and we can make decisions, and not that it can be delegated to certain even technological features of participation. So that's very encouraging. Just one question to you about your history of direct democracy. It was a little bit interesting because, I mean, obviously the modern idea of the referendum has been developed in the states of the early states of the US and French Revolution, and then in a way materialized in Switzerland. But the very idea of the term referendum came in fact from the Alpine regions, where people had to go to different meeting points to discuss issues and then take back the decision to their villages, to their valleys. That's the real, bringing back the decision, that's the term referendum. So in fact, there is a democratic source of the term referendum. And the autocratic one, I think, has little to do with referendum. It's really the plebiscite. I mean, it's what the Napoleon tried to introduce, is that the monarch tried to bypass the legislator or any other thing to go directly to the people. And Brexit is, of course, this kind of tradition. It has little to do with a referendum. So I think we should be cautious in confusing plebiscites and referendums, because otherwise there will always be this fundamental critic about and belief that democracy through the referendum is impossible, because there has been some autocrats misusing that. Thank you very much.
Do you want to reply to the comment?
Yeah.
Or? Oh.
Well, actually, yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree with you. Oh, sorry. Well, anyway, I totally agree with you. My little knowledge about the history of referendums is actually pretty recent. I'm just borrowing the ideas from this professor, Alberto Penades, who published recently, like last week, a brief history of the referendum. And he also admits that before Switzerland included it in the constitution in 1891, before that there were all these succession of little referendums in the Alpine region. But he also suggests that these previous referendums in the Alpine region were inspired by the French constitutional referendum. So it's like a contamination effect or a spillover effect, if you want. And these two tensions and the fact that they are, of course, democratic at core and at the base, but at the same time they are getting inspired by some referendums that are not democratic as such as we tend to know them. And what is also true is the fact that for a long time in Europe there was, besides the Switzerland experience, there was this remorse, this detachment from the notion of referendum as something that could be corrupted and used by a evil authority to do their will. But yeah, what you have said is absolutely right. I have just jumped from the French Revolution to the Switzerland example without explaining all these Alpine region referendum that indeed exist and are a valuable antecedent, of course.
Just a small comment. Sorry for, I don't want to be the best servicer, but the Alpine referendum things are predating much these kind of French revolutionary things. It's from the 15th and 16th century. What happened in Switzerland afterwards, as you are right, is that the cantons, the states, introduced referendum rights. So the idea of the French Revolution really transposed it into this fruitful state-making development, and in 1848 the constitutional referendum was made. And it's very important to know that Switzerland didn't invent the referendum invented Switzerland. Thank you.
Buenos días, muchas gracias por las presentaciones. La pregunta ahora la dirijo particularmente para John. Y tú has descrito al principio de la presentación una serie de características que hacen que la democracia directa en el contexto estadounidense tenga ciertos problemas que evidentemente existen y posiblemente existen en todas partes del mundo. Pero mi pregunta es, ¿en qué medida la decisión de Citizens United instrumentaliza el proceso y si quizás no existirían otro tipo de soluciones más de corte jurídico, por ejemplo, eliminar el Citizens United o cambiarlo, para que esta instrumentalización de los pequeños intereses angostos y egoístas que usan estos recursos, como tú dijiste, personas inclusive individuales o grandes corporaciones, y nos ahorraría muchísimo de los dolores de cabeza que tenemos con la democracia directa, particularmente, bueno, el estado de California es el más famoso por los males, Oregon es el menos malo, es la bandera de lucha de la democracia directa en Estados Unidos, quizás Massachusetts, pero ¿en qué medida no nos ahorraríamos un montón de problemas simplemente mejorando el sistema, limpiando Citizens United, que es posiblemente también la bandera del problema de la democracia directa americana? Y nos ahorraríamos, me parece que es fantástica el review process, no cabe la menor duda, pero muchos de los dramas de conocimiento, de tipos de preguntas e instrumentalización de estos mecanismos se ahorrarían.
Okay, so first, yes. It would be good to have better campaign finance laws. In the United States, we have a special challenge, which is our First Amendment, freedom of speech, has been interpreted by our Supreme Court to refer to commercial speech. So you have freedom of commercial expression. That's not inevitable. That could be changed by a constitutional amendment. But even within that context, there have been some laws that have had better campaign finance reform. The simplest law would be the disclosure of the source of information. So at a minimum, every contribution of $100 or more, we should know where it came from. That would be an easy correction to Citizens United. And that is its worst feature, is covering up the sources of money, dark money as we call it. But the power of Citizens United is grossly overstated. So let me give you an example. Many of you may have heard of research in the United States asking the question, has the United States become a plutocracy? Has it become a country ruled by the rich? And political scientists had done an analysis of the laws that are passed and its relationship to public opinion. And the only connection they can find is that the public opinion of the very elite, the top 1%, can predict changes in legislation, but the opinion of the rest of the people don't matter. When they explain their findings, this worrisome finding, right, that elite public opinion appears to be shaping policy only, they say that campaign finance and Citizens United is one of the reasons for this problem. But their own data completely contradict that claim because their data go back to 1980, right, 30 years. And there is absolutely no change in the pattern. Elite opinion has dominated public policy for 30 years. In 1980, we had much better campaign finance laws. No difference. The difference is, between then and now, is that corporations and special interests, such as the National Rifle Association, have a much better appreciation of the power of direct democracy. They used to fail to invest in these elections. They used to fail to purchase these elections. Now they don't make that mistake. Now they're in. When they pass a law in one state to deregulate alcohol sale, they move to the next state and the next state and the next state. So good laws and bad laws are being passed at a higher rate than ever because political interest groups now recognize the value. Now, if you have campaign finance reform, it might help a little. At least we would know, where the money comes from. But the money finds a way. There is a way for this money always to have political influence. So the way I look at it is we could use better campaign finance laws, but we also need an alternative source of information than commercial advertising. There needs to be some other place voters can turn, especially voters who don't have a political party. In the United States, the largest percentage don't have a political party. More than a third of US voters don't strongly identify with any party. So yes to campaign finance reform, but don't overestimate its impact. Yes to the Citizens Initiative Review, but don't overestimate its impact either.
Thank you very much for this conversation. My question is around. Oh yes, sorry. My name is Sanjeev Rao. I'm from the U.S. Really appreciate the conversation. My question is around, and there's much to appreciate about efforts to promote direct democracy and the Citizens Initiative Review specifically. My question's around inclusion and equity, particularly for marginalized groups who have not had access or voice to political participation. And so if one or both of you could speak to some of those dynamics, particularly, for example, with the review process, if only voters are part of the review process, wouldn't it be quite interesting if non-voters are actually engaged, because then the voting pamphlet would actually reflect the views of the entire constituency rather than just the voting population. Right. Or for example, people who might be working in fragile workplaces where they can't afford to take 4 days off to participate. So if there are things like, if you could just clarify or elaborate on those ideas, that would be helpful.
Sure. I'll answer first. You may want to answer as well. Go ahead. Okay. So first, the Citizens Initiative Review, participation in that is paid for. So you get a wage and all expenses are covered. The proponents of this law are trying to make it explicit in the state law that you have legal protection against for your job. So if you have to take off time from your job, they also put it on the weekend, so you're only missing 2 weekdays. That was an attempt to address that issue. But really, there needs to be a legal protection, just like jury service in the United States. If you have to serve on a jury for a year, your job will still be there for you when you get back. In some ways, the bigger problem is for small business owners, because they may be the employer and the employee, and it's a problem. So you have to address that, and there are ways to address it, and that's why they shrunk the process and so on. But I want to give you an example of a powerful example of what the review can do for marginalized voices. So one of the reviews was on casinos. In the United States, in many parts of the United States, such as Oregon, gambling is legal within casinos that are on Native American land, tribal casinos. And that was true in the state of Oregon. But private businesses that are not associated with the Native Americans want to have their own casinos, and so they put on the ballot a question authorizing private casinos off of Native American land. When the review panel considered this issue, the proponents of that, you can imagine how wealthy they were, right? They had a very strong professional team of lawyers, all in suits and all that. On the other side was a representative of the tribal nations in the state of Oregon, and he did not have the same budget or the same resources, but he made a very simple argument to the panel, which was very persuasive, which was, this is surely going to take money away from the Native American people in the state of Oregon. Are you sure that that's something we need to do to this people who we have marginalized and treated badly for centuries? Here they have this one opportunity to make a ridiculous amount of money. Are we sure we want to take any of that away from them? And the panel was sympathetic to that. That argument on behalf of this very small population makes up a tiny percentage of Oregon. So my point is that a moral argument that has some strength to it, has good reasons and history, can be very persuasive, even if none of the panelists themselves come from that group. And it showed up right in the statement. And in fact, the proponents of that new private casino law, they just stopped their campaign after the review. They gave up. They thought, we're never going to survive after this, and ended their campaign. So some reason to be optimistic.
Yeah, that's definitely an issue, the inclusion and equity, and actually there are very critical voices pointing at the fact that maybe direct democracy and participatory democracy mechanisms are in fact the seed for more inequality. But what do we have? I mean, the data that I know from Spain, Catalonia, etc., what suggests is that indeed we have some inequality. The fact that these people that are less interested, less acknowledgeable, that come from marginalized or not privileged backgrounds, etc., participate less, but more or less they are reproducing exactly the same inequalities that we find in the more common types of participation of representative mechanisms such as the vote. So it's true that they are not improving, but at least they are not making it worse. And in order to break this cycle and to bring in these people that have less probabilities to take part in this kind of direct decisions or other types of participation mechanism, we need two things. One is a random component, such as the example that John has brought us today, and also positive incentives in the sense of, paying for the days of work, etc. And that will be it. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the discussion. My name is Alice El Wakil. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Zurich. I had a question regarding the Citizens Initiative review. Namely, do you think that that we should want to have such a process before any kind of popular vote on any issue, relating to what Carol Galais was saying about the different issues that can be put to the vote or to other kind of democratic innovations? Should we want to have it on any issue, or are there some issues where it's more appropriate? And how justified are the decisions of this committee to select specific issues? Because I guess it's also a very political question in the end. Can be framed as such, or do they have other reasons to justify their decisions? Thank you.
Sure. First of all, good luck with your doctoral dissertation work. And I should say Katie and I are enthusiastic about sharing our data. So anyone who wants to do research on this, believe me, we would love to have more co-authors. You can be first author. We are overwhelmed with data, and we feel sad that data sits there. So the point is, very open sharing of data. Please contact us, and we'll let you publish articles. In fact, we have someone whose doctoral dissertation may be using the data from 2018 because I don't want to have to analyze it. To your question, I think it could be used on any question. I really do. The only exception would be a question that's on the ballot that is obvious. Sometimes for legal reasons, we need to have everybody vote on something, and it's a waste of everyone's time to have an analysis of an issue that. So if it's going to pass by a large margin and there's no controversy, no. Otherwise, yes, I think it would always help One of my favorite stories from the review was the very first Citizens Initiative review. When they finished their analysis of an issue, it was a mandatory sentencing issue. They got on a bus to go to the state capitol to present their findings at a press conference. And I asked one of the citizens on the bus, so what are your thoughts? Haven't you done this? This is the first time in the world, history of the world, this has happened. How do you feel? And he said, I want to feel good. I want to feel excited, but I only feel one thing. I am terrified of everything else on my ballot. I know how to vote on one thing. And there are all these questions. He said, I'm excited that there's another one next week. I want to see what they had to say. But the rest, I don't have the time. So why not all of them, right? Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. ¿Por qué no? As to the commission choosing issues, I think you have to have the ability to choose some issues because you don't want to do all of them. And the commission so far has worked well. I like the idea that the majority of the commission is panelists, right? They get promoted up to this. So it's not as political as you might think. There are still political appointees, but they're a minority of that commission.
Oh, let me include a commercial banner as well. We do have data as well. Actually, you can download it from Participedia. It's or data from our past research project called MECPALO, and you can find about 600 participatory experiences at the local level in Spain, and some of them are from Italy. The thing is that very few of them fit into this direct democracy category. Most of them are just participatory, and very few of them are really consultations or referendums in a broader sense. They are mostly participation experiences, but it's a really nice data set, and you're very welcome to use it for your own purposes as well. Cool.
Hi, I'm Julian. I'm a PhD candidate from Brussels, and I have two questions for John. So the first one, I was wondering, how do participants decide on the recommendation? Do they decide by consensus? And if not, if you have a minority and a majority, how do you include that divide in the recommendation? And the second question, it's more about a reflection. I would like to know if you have thought about other uses of citizen review to improve the deliberation within the broader public sphere.
Sure. I'll start with the second question. I'll keep my answers short, but we can email and say more, because they could be long answers. The short answer is absolutely. There are many, many applications of this idea, but I'll describe to you one that you probably have never heard of. You know that in the United States, because we use a first-past-the-post election system, we have to draw district boundaries for state legislators and for members of Congress. And you know that the political parties do gerrymandering, right? They draw the districts in ways to their advantage. This was not invented by the Republican Party. They are horrible, horrible, terrible districts. The Democrats were honestly just as bad when they controlled Congress and the state legislatures. So it's a real problem. But the state of California created a redistricting commission that is a quasi-random sample. If it gets into the details, it's interesting and different. But the point is, it is a semi-random panel representing both political parties and people outside those parties, a third of the commission. And each of those three subgroups has to agree on the districts. They've drawn one plan in 2010, and it was very nonpartisan, very good districts. Now the state of Colorado and the state of Michigan just passed a very similar law. So these quasi-random samples are going to start drawing these districts, and the districts will be very good. I have every confidence it will be just as good in those states. So that's just one example, but it's an important example. It's not obscure, because if you think about it, one of the things we should take away from the legislature is the ability to set the rules for the legislature, right? The conflict of interest is so obvious. That's why I think direct democracy has its strongest justification, setting the rules for elections and legislators. As to your other question, the recommendation and the voting. There have been different processes since 2010. The organizers of it keep trying variations, but I'll give you a simple answer, which is the panel first votes on its key findings, and there they require a supermajority. I think the threshold right now is 2/3. So if 2/3 of the panel agree on something being a key finding, it goes in. Then the pro and con statements are interesting. Everybody participates in writing the pro and con arguments, and in the end, you don't divide any longer into pro and con sides. You keep writing them, And it really is kind of a consensus process at that point. People who oppose the measure might improve one of the pro arguments and vice versa. And it's something they get very excited about, the idea that they're just trying to provide voters with better information. So it's broadly run on the consensus principle, but there are voting procedures that require supermajorities at different times. I should add one more detail. Jim Fishkin was very critical of the review when it initially had a vote total at the bottom. It would say out of 24 voters, 19 support this measure and 5 oppose it. That has been removed because, for various reasons, it just wasn't necessary. And so the recommendation now is sometimes implicit or implied, but sometimes it's subtle, and sometimes it really depends on how you read the statement. Sometimes the very first thing the panel says expresses frustration about the people who wrote the measure and that they're lying to you about something. But then if you read the whole statement, you can see, well, they still think it's a good law. So sometimes you have to really think through, what are they trying to tell me? Sometimes they're not trying to tell you something. They're just trying to help you think. But other times there is an implication that this law was not well written. And by reading the statement, you can see that. There are things that it would do that were clearly not intended.
Hi, I'm Ligia from Brazil. Thank you for the talk. We are talking about direct democracy in these days, and I'm worried about the relationship between direct democracy and good deliberative spaces. And in Brazil, we are analyzing the process of the political representation inside the programs, the participative programs. And I would like to know about you, what do you think about this? To qualify the deliberation, we need to improve spaces of that shows representatives in the communities, not only direct democracy. Thank you.
Yes, this will be related to his question on how to bring into these processes people that are more on the margins of the political system, and also to improve the representativeness, which is of course the downside of direct democracy. The fact that first of all, they attract only people that are more motivated, that have direct interest in what is about to be decided, etc. So, as I said, the random element, the fact that at some point you need to introduce randomization and selection of participants, it's something that it's absolutely necessary, and with that needs to be applied all kind of positive incentives in order to bring these people in with a positive attitude and without any losses, especially material losses. From my experience with participatory budgeting in Spain, we have several problems. One of the problems is that the outcome that most people see and for which participatory process is unknown is the final consultation that takes this, follows this ritual referendum-like, and most people don't know really what's happening in there. And and the fact that what happens in there, as far as I know, is not randomized at all and follows this typical procedure, just open gates, and everybody that is really motivated for takes part with all the problems that it brings. No? The fact that most people are very similar, deliberation is not at its best, etc. So basically, in this chapter, as in many other chapters, we are just waiting for you to follow you, because you are breaking the ice for us in Europe and particularly in Spain. So we are here to learn, basically.
What I would add is I think it is very important to think about deliberation within every aspect of society. The best theories of deliberative democracy are complex theories. These small random samples, like a citizens' initiative review or a citizens' assembly, are very interesting. Mini publics are very interesting and feel very new, but they're a small part of the theory of deliberative democracy. So we need to both think about how all kinds of different political spaces could be more deliberative, but we also need to recognize the complex relationships among different political spaces. So sometimes for the good of the society, it's good to have a protest, an angry protest that pushes an issue onto the agenda. That can actually be positive for deliberation, even though the protest isn't. But I am interested in the quality of the deliberation within that organization. Have they thought about the different points of view and the different issues that maybe are more important to put on the agenda? So all I want to stress is that I think your question is great, that I think we do need to think about deliberation in all kinds of spaces, not just in these very special random samples.
Are there more questions? Yes. No long comments though. You can chat at lunch.
Oh, sorry. I'm really interested in what's going on in Spain regarding the autonomy of local entities to develop direct democracy. Because I mean, I have followed for more than 25 years now this, in a way, tragedy of trying to become more democratic and then always get this like killer applications from central powers. How can you overcome this kind of blockade to real more direct democracy here in this state? It would be very interesting to me if you see any like openings, or if it's just like it is.
I have 2 fingers on this. So I wanted to ask John, and maybe if there are no more questions, that could be the closing question. What was the history that brought the initiative review on board? And if you can draw lessons for other places on how to promote this initiative review. So the 2 questions are quite linked.
Do you want to answer your question?
So, yeah. Well, it's very interesting because we are right now in the middle of this turmoil in which these Tribunal Supremo and Tribunal Constitucional are just boycotting local initiatives in order to boycott the regional intention of using these initiatives for self-achievement, etc. So actually, there has been some initiatives that were even previous to that moment, 2014, 2015, which consist in playing with the numbers. So in order to avoid some of these hampers that come from above, they try to call a share of the population that does not coincide exactly with the census, like calling younger people under 18 years of age, so they can frame it like a non-exactly referendum-like, etc. So they are doing this, and also trying to concentrate in most concrete issues, like avoiding general terms, because this will raise red flags, like this is too much like a referendum. So they are playing with these 2 things, the people, the demos who are being called, and the issue. And we are still, since there are so few of them, we are still watching and following what exactly be the result. So hopefully they will get away with it.
To answer the second question, the Citizens Initiative Review came about, there's just 2 answers. One answer is that you can create a more deliberative institution when you find a reason that powerful elected officials need it. And in the case of Oregon, the legislature is seeing laws get passed that take away their authority to raise funds, and that tell them how to spend the money they have, and that constrain them in all kinds of ways. They hadn't thought of this process, but they were ready for it. And in the state of Massachusetts, actually, it was a state legislator who is championing this idea. But in both cases, the answer is a little more complex. And it's a happy answer, especially for those who are in graduate school, because it goes like this, or professors who want to have a connection with the real world. So in 2000, I wrote a book called By Popular Demand, and I talked about the idea of having these panels evaluate candidates. And late in the book, I said, but the obvious place to start is to analyze issues, because no legislator wants there to be a process for studying them. But they love the idea of studying the laws that get passed that control them. And sure enough, a couple graduate students in the state of Oregon had read this book and said, oh, that would be fun. And they were very naive. They thought, oh, well, let's just get the law passed. Let's go tell the legislature about this amazing idea and let's make it happen. And that kind of worked. It sort of worked. Meanwhile, in Massachusetts, there was a student, an undergraduate, writing his senior thesis on deliberative democracy. And he reads about this, and he reads about Oregon, and then he becomes an aide to a state legislator, and he says to his boss, hey, there's this idea in Oregon. Why don't we do it? And his boss, who sometimes is a professor, said, oh, that's a great idea, and talks to his colleagues, and they say, sure, let's see if we can do that. Now, it's taking a few years. In both cases, it takes 3 or 4 years, but it looks like very likely it's going to happen in Massachusetts. So there was a role for, and I should add one more detail. Katie and I have spent many times flying on planes to meet with state legislatures. In Oregon, the legislature wanted to have their bill evaluated. We tried it once. Did it work? And they want to know about the research. In fact, they love the idea that the research was paid for by the National Science Foundation. So there's a complex relationship. My answer is that it's partly about, first, there has to be an opportunity. There has to be some opportunity where there's a reason that people who are powerful would want maybe to give away a little bit of that power, maybe push a question to the public or help the public avoid making dumb decisions. But then there is a role for activists. There's a role for academics and public officials working together. And the lucky thing for Katie and I is we really just get to do research now. People sometimes say this is our process. It's not our process. We get to study it. But we only get to study it because of the activists and because of the public officials that made it come into place. So I think the lesson for other places is to have good relationships as a scholar with people who are activists, and as an activist, have academics who can do neutral evaluation that will be trustworthy. And that the symbiotic relationship there can be good. And hopefully somebody then has a connection to elected officials who might have the power to implement laws. So it's a complex answer, but it's really about being a part of the system, being an actively engaged part of the system that can lead, under the right circumstances, to democratic reform.
There is space for one last question if you want, and if not, we can go have lunch. Anybody?
A comer.
Done? Thank you so much. Thank you.